destroy it. So that was really interesting to think that, you know, we need to actually talk about numbers and see how valuable this is in order to preserve it, not to exploit it. So Till, I think you're still muted.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah, there you are. Okay, so what are your reactions? You know, after watching this, being you the scientist here, or you can tell us what can you tell us about it?
Yeah, well, first of all, I really enjoyed just these pictures, this beautiness of people living there, the local cultures, but also the nature, of course. I mean, that's, if you like the nature, then you can easily see how rich it is, what a treasure it is. Yeah, I think there was a lot, and even we could transfer something here to South Carolina. For instance, how we really like at this stage transform our surface, our swamps and so on into very cheap neighborhoods. But it's a different story. Yeah, the big question is, do we want to have sustainability? Do we want to have a sustainable world and management and living together or not? Do we care or not? And people answer this in a different way. What I found remarkable is that this film was produced in 2012. And it was after a couple of years with a lot of, they mentioned these words, coexistence, communication, and this kind of stuff, support, learning from each other. So in 2012, it was at the end of a long process, basically. And now the situation has flipped, like it has in the US. And now suddenly all these, if you like, sustainability achievements do not really count anymore. So the big question is, what I ask myself, these different perspectives, different angles of view. Do we want to work on a sustainable future which integrates all these different elements? Or do we just want to focus on one thing, and this might be profit or something like that? So the big question is, if we want to go the sustainability route, then we need to start to look at the system. If you're not interested in the system, if you don't want to understand or can understand the system, you can't do it in a sustainable way.
And you, when you were talking about, and thank you for contextualizing the documentary, which is 7 or 8 years old, and yes, and it's pretty disturbing to learn that in this past year and a half, or this past year, all these projects have been put aside for a government that doesn't seem to really care at all about this region, and is just wants to go back to that old model, right, of exploitation and just progress under the name of progress and modernization. So when you talk about system, can you like specify a little bit more, explain to us like what do you mean with system? Like, can you tell us more?
Yeah. I mean, a system is a complex, a system is something really complex, and there are different players, let's say, in the system. So I think they really put a lot of, put it into really great light. So there are the human tribes, the locals, even the smaller cities. There is the ecosystem, so the forest and the vegetation and the animals living in it. There are the soils. They talked about the rainwater. They talked about the rivers and the groundwater. So this all is one system, basically, at local level. But of course, you also could go at a over regional level. Then I think we very much learned that the Amazon is a part of the global climate system, a part of the global carbon cycle, a part of the global hydrological cycle. So whenever we change or they change something there, it will bring the local system out of balance, but also the South American ecological and climatic system, and therefore also the world's, the world climatic system, because they are so much linked to each other.
Yeah, and it was incredible to hear that the water, it it could be sustaining the whole world. Apparently, the professor mentioned this, and that was amazing to me to hear that there's so much water, so much. I guess water is life, right? So I thought that was incredible. Me coming from Peru, we also are the country with the second largest share of the Amazon too. So we have our own problems there. Someone, Shane Nobles asked, made a comment. I found it very interesting that one professor stated that the rise in temperatures was due to changing land use and not greenhouse gases yet, he says. Can you comment on this?
Well, it depends. Yeah, absolutely. This is really an important question, I think. You again can look at local levels, or scale it up on what is the global context. So on local levels, they mentioned that the trees have a very powerful role in the heat budget and in the water budget there. So on the one hand, their canopy really keeps the water down at the floor for quite a while. So keeps it there, delays it before it starts evaporating or, transpirating, which is, sweating basically of the trees. So they really have a function there. If you cut them down, the effect will be that they don't, retreat the water anymore, and they don't evaporate the water anymore. What it means is that immediately the water after rainfall, and we saw the rainfalls there. I mean, we are in the center of a monsoonal system. So immediately after you cut the trees down, the water will just run off the surface, basically, into the rivers, which causes a lot of erosion. So the effect is, first of all, the water will leave the place, will leave the area and go towards the ocean. The second is it will take the soils with it. And we know that the soils in tropic areas are extremely thin, very powerful, very rich in nutrients. They are the drivers of the motor, the motor of the biology there. But erosion takes only a few years, and I think even the cattle owner, he mentioned this. You can use it for a few years, and then it's just, maybe for mining, but it has no value anymore. So this is at local scale. At global scale, since the Amazon is part of the global hydrological cycle, we also can measure it. So just as a final word, usually, I mean, we have CO2 in the atmosphere that is natural. The nature always wants to be in a kind of balance. Now we blow so much additional CO2 in the atmosphere by our modern industrial life that this heats up the global atmosphere. At the same time, if you cut down the trees, there is no cooling effect anymore by the trees, by the transpiration, and therefore they already can measure it in the Amazonian, the part of Brazil up there, that the temperature is rising at very local scale.
Great, thank you for that answer, Bill. I have another question, comment. Someone asked, I thought the wood carvers were extremely impressive in their work. They were creating those tools with the turtles and the armadillos so quickly. They look beautiful, someone said. Another person mentioned that one girl in the film asked that, do our forests look like the forest in England? And well, she was learning digitally. And how do we effectively communicate science over Zoom in today's world? Wow, that's a very broad question, but what do you think of this?
Yeah, I mean,
it's one way, right?
Communication requires, this is the teacher now, communication requires, an appropriate language, but also the willingness of the people to listen. And I'm fully convinced that we at Coastal and also our students, we are the informed community, and we are smart enough that we also have the obligation to be informed and to communicate, I think. But we live in a world, and this is why I'm a little hesitant at this stage, where half of us are really interested in learning something and working on and improve processes, make life better, and the other half doesn't want to hear it. So if there is no common sense to listen to, to inform people, listen to or look at data or something like that, what we might call facts or reality, or I don't know. If their willingness is not there to listen, and I can easily point on the Brazilian government, but I don't need to point so far.
No, you
far
don't.
away. Then there is no baseline for exchange and communication.
Yeah, really, really appalling what happened the beginning of this year in Brazil with the fires, and the head scientist arguing that these fires were not the usual fires, and there were all this list of factors that he was mentioning, and then the government just basically firing him for opposing their views. So that was really bad. That this just happened a few months ago, and somebody asked.
Maybe I can add something on this. I mean, we also have these massive wildfires along the west coast. Mm-hmm. We had it over the couple of last months. So in Amazonia, there are two reasons why they have these massive fires and had it over the past very few years. One is that suddenly the government allowed people to walk in and to burn it down, to convert it into cattle lands, which is really not of high value unless you won't have the cheap beef. But the second reason is, and we had this question here by one of our folks in the audience already, if we cut the trees down, then it will be much drier and it will be warmer, and it will turn into a kind of savanna-like environment. So then, this is all the ingredients you basically need to create wildfires.
Someone asked, what do you think it would take for the government to pay or take attention? Well, someone in the documentary mentioned that if this continues, this cannot be regenerated, at least not within a few years. So the economic downfall would be just so severe. But people people in this documentary are trying to avoid that, right? And my country, for instance, is very interesting, because another question that Till and I, we were talking before the film was, it's obviously that the government, it's the let's say the most responsible for it, but what about everyone else? This is like a responsibility that everybody else wants to share. And this is also happening, that the Brazilian government has argued that this is a matter of national sovereignty, and nobody should meddle here. It's our land, it's our region, and then we take care of it or we don't. Which is, it's hard to understand. In my country, for instance, I was just reading, their government is giving contracts to oil companies and to explore and build roads. And at the same time, they have given this land to indigenous tribes. And there's a law in Peru where the indigenous tribes have the right to veto any project. Well, the government is doing both at the same time, and it's just giving this land to these oil companies while they're also telling the tribes that it's their land. So it's just trying to play both sides, I guess, and that's just wrong. That's just what's happening in my country and in Brazil. And I don't know exactly if that's something that it's happening there. Somebody
maybe I can
mention something
with a follow-up comment on this.
Yes.
I mean, it's always the big question, who owns it and who is supposed to make decisions and use it? I found it remarkable that this film started with a native guy saying, we own the land. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, to combine these two thoughts. So one is, every forest is able to regenerate itself. You know, if you take some few trees out, or if you clear really an area, but a small area, it will take a while, but it will regenerate. It will close it again. It will heal it again. But we call it a threshold. So at a certain point, at a certain magnitude, this forest will be so fragmented, like our swamps here are so fragmented. You know, the cypress swamps so fragmented, they won't recover anymore. And given the fact, for instance, that 9 countries are part of the Amazon, if one country or 2 countries, you know, take a lot out of it, then the other countries will also feel the effect because their forests will automatically degrade. Mm-hmm. Or they talked about the, what was the name, the rivers, the flying rivers. So southern Brazil, Argentina, they need this water from the flying rivers, you know, so the monsoonal water, which is transported by air masses to the south. Without that, they would dry up, you know. So there is a very strong international component, and it really depends on the willingness and ability of a government to deal with that or to ignore it.
Yes. Another person asked, Austin asked it, and I think I answered this a little bit. The Amazon stretches into a lot of other countries. Do they do any worse or better in protecting the rainforest and the river? And like I mentioned, in Peru, we have our own troubles with this. The logging, also there's illegal mining. They have these boats that go in the Amazon, the river, and they just pretty much drag. It's like it's a drag that just goes and like pretty much pulls everything from the riverbed just to get gold, just to get any minerals, and obviously that's illegal. And the government doesn't have a good management. They have very few people to very few guards, you know, rangers to take care of this, and it's just such a vast amount of land too that it's really hard to take care of. But I'm not sure what happens. Brazil, Colombia has a little bit of also the Amazon and Ecuador, but they're like smaller size, obviously not compared to Brazil or even Peru. Somebody also 45 years, he was very proud when they awarded a logger that he worked with an award for sustainability. He had logged the same tract of land 3 times during his career. So this is what you were mentioning, some of this, right? I guess it can be done in this extraction.
Well, I'm not a forest specialist, but to what I learned, it can be done. Of course, it needs to, I mean, either have strong control or really the local communities are fully backing this. It can be done. Of course, it's more expensive. And there are different styles, you know, you can extract certain species and only a limited number per hectare or something like that. Or you can do it like it was done here, or is still done here along the US East Coast by the paper mills. Let it grow for 30 years and then you cut it down, whatever is there, but not too much. And then you just wait for another 30 years. In case of the rainforest, it would need much longer because you lose the soil so quickly. But yeah, I mean, there are strategies, but it's not about the hot and quick money then.
Yeah, it's I think that's the issue that, like you mentioned, this can be done. However, it probably takes longer time, more work. It takes money, and probably the profits are not as much as if you were just cutting everything down and making a profit, right? So it's the easy way out, always the one that seems to be winning. And I assume that's what's happening right now in the Amazon in Brazil. It's just easier to just exploit it and not do any of this, right? Not do any of these projects, not do any of this, use technology or talk to the scientists to see what can be done. That's just too much work for, it seems. At least that's the impression I'm getting.
So in my understanding, what mainly was done over the past decades in Brazil, and what somehow, you know, experienced a kind of revival nowadays is they are not so much interested in the wood. They just burn it down or cut it down and burn it then because, the meat prices, with the rising wealth in many parts of the world, it's just, the demand for cattle meat.
Yeah.
So they transform it into these huge cattle farms as we know them from southern Brazil and southern Argentina, where there was forest in former times as well. So, this is always, is it, the ethic legitimation to tell other people, other countries to preserve the forest, but a while ago it was cut down in our areas already. So, or medieval times or something like that. So there is, as always, there is no real answer. But yeah, it is either the systems approach, which basically means have all the long-term costs also in mind, and then you go very quickly to sustainability with all the hazards and landslides and whatever it might cause. Or, you want to have the quick money and make the big business, and who cares what's going on in 10 or 20 years.
Yes, I think that's the tendency right now. And I guess you can also talk about what's happening here, right, in the U.S. with the coal industry. Unfortunately, that business is not sustainable, and it hurt a lot of people. But then the government needs to find other ways to really help these people, and they haven't. And I don't think going back to that coal, right, getting those jobs back, it's the answer. That's not really the answer for that. So a little misguided.
As a scientist, I would like to add one more thing, and this is, since we are at university, we have the ability to easily look at real numbers. What is real? What is close to reality? So you mentioned the coal industry here. If you look at just at the numbers, how many people are employed in this country in the coal industry? Well, I'm not from West Virginia, as you can hear, or from Pennsylvania, but it is, the number of people employed there in this sector is hilariously small. If we look at what's going on now since 2 years in the Amazon, it is by far not at the level where it was 15 years ago. So yeah, they do a lot of bad things there. They destroy a lot. But we always need to somehow stay in the context. I don't want to say it's great what they're doing there or necessary, but it's still, 1/3 of what was going on 15 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. And all the medicine, like a lot of the medicine, right? Plants. I don't know the number exactly, but at least 3% of the medicine we use comes from plants from the Amazon, which I found amazing. And I know in my country, it's very very often that I read that there are new species of something has just been discovered, which is incredible. A new species of toad, a new species of a snake, or a new species of something else that's just been discovered.
Well, it's a kind of endless story because again, it's a complex system. So you mentioned, the species and the potential, the biotechnical potential behind that. I'm a coastal geologist. If you create a direct, runoff of the rivers, plus all the soil and all the nutrients and all the organic matter in it, this will go down to the coast, and it will completely change the coastal system. It will pretty much probably harm, there's more fresh water coming in, there's much more turbidity, so the water is not clear anymore and so on. So, talking about coral reefs or mangrove forest and this kind of, hotspot ecosystems. So there's a very much a regional remote effect, for instance, to the ocean, and the oceans are stressed anyway already.
Yes. Are there any other questions from our audience here, or video audience, if you will? Any other questions that you have? If not, I just would like to invite you to next Tuesday's film, another Brazilian film. This time we're moving the story, the narrative into the city. and it's an interesting story, and I hope you you join us for next Tuesday. I want to thank Till Hannebath for being our guest and enlightening us a lot with this scientific perspectives and on the Amazon. And I also would like to thank Michael DiGiorgio for his technical help. And is there any other question? I think there's one more. Oh no, just a thank you. Thank you for this great conversation, and you're welcome. And I hope you enjoy this. And we'll see you next week. Thank you. Thank you so much to everyone.
Thanks so much for inviting me.
Goodbye.